Good afternoon and welcome to our keynote session, a fireside chat featuring Tori Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and Heather Wilson, President of the University of Texas at El Paso and former Secretary of the Air Force. This session is moderated by Rob Meyerson, Ascend Executive Producer. If you have questions for the speakers during this session, please enter them into the chat feature. You may have to click on the chat button above the window to view and ask questions. And now we are pleased to welcome our moderator, Rob Meyerson. Rob?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ASCENDx Summit on Space Policy and Education. I hope you all have enjoyed the first round of sessions this morning. We aim to examine major issues in space policy, as well as education and workforce development today. This includes topics such as space traffic management and integration, Earth observation and data management, logistical infrastructures, and what's being done to produce the next generation of space leaders. I want to thank Jacobs as the sponsor for our space traffic management track and Lockheed Martin Corporation for being Ascend's inaugural cornerstone founding sponsor. Before I introduce our guests, let's congratulate the team led by Lockheed Martin, University of Arizona, and NASA on their successful touch and go mission maneuver yesterday with the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft at the asteroid Bennu. The news of this successful tag maneuver is certainly inspiring to us all. And now I am pleased to announce and introduce our two esteemed guests. Dr. Heather Wilson is the president of the University of Texas at El Paso, an R1 research university with 25,000 students offering 74 bachelor's degree programs, 74 master's programs, and 22 doctoral programs. Dr. Wilson is the former Secretary of the Air Force, former president of South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, and a former congressman from the state of New Mexico. Welcome, Dr. Wilson. Tori Bruno is the president and CEO of United Launch Alliance since 2014. Prior to ULA, Tori was the VP and General Manager of Lockheed Martin Strategic and Missile Defense Systems. He joined Lockheed in 1984. Tori is a member of the National Space Council User Advisory Group and was formerly chairman of the Diversity Council at Lockheed Martin Space Systems. He is also a member of the 2020 class of AIAA Fellows. Together, Heather and Tori will have a discussion on the future of this industry and how space policy and education are key to the path forward. Please remember to submit any questions in a session chat, and welcome both Heather and Tori to the stage. Now, I'm going to ask each of them to give a short opening remark, and then we'll get into questions. So let's start with Dr. Wilson.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. I'll keep this short, but one of the reasons that this subject continues to interest me is because America is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they're seeking to develop the capability to deny us the use of space in crisis or in war. And we've seen that even just as recently as this summer when the Russians took one of their inspection satellites and, having done a close maneuver to one of the United States satellites, then went off to a Russian one, and instead of inspecting it, ejected an object toward it. And that's, the Chinese demonstrated the ability to knock down a dead weather satellite of their own in 2008. So the threat has changed. And so the United States is heavily dependent on space for national security, and we need to respond to that emerging threat. So I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Heather. Tori, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm also very excited to be here and to participate. I feel that we are just at a very important moment in history, not just for our country, but for the world at large. We are standing on the threshold of what promises to be just a tremendously unprecedented set of decades that stretch out in front of us in space, with the potential for permanent human habitation beyond our planet, a self-sustaining cislunar economy, things that could promise in the near future to provide an almost shortage-free, scarcity-free human future. So a tremendously bright set of possibilities, all enabled by space, while at the same time, as Heather has alluded to, we are also heading back immediately today into an environment of pure competition, where the resurgent Russia, a rising China, countries that have ambitions around the world that not only potentially limit America's influence, but potentially limit the growth and expansion of democracy and freedom to be curtailed by totalitarian regimes and governments. And for the first time in history, space, the previously historically peaceful domain, is now being weaponized as we speak by these adversaries. And that brings with it the potential to limit our unrivaled use of space to keep the peace around this globe. And so this is a tremendously important moment in time for both reasons. And there is an awful lot to talk about in terms of space policy, technology, and the education that supports all of that.
That's great. Thanks to both of you for those great opening remarks. And I want to start with just a question for, related to the workforce and education theme of our session today. Think back in time to your college days, and what's the primary difference between the skills and capabilities of graduates, then when you were coming out of school and now? And what are you seeing?
Want to go first, Heather?
Sure, Tori and I have enough gray hair or no hair to be able to make some significant contrast. One of the things that I think is different about students today is their expectation that information will be immediately available. So they don't worry about being able to find facts. So there's a lot more focus on solving complex problems than there is on mastering just material that they could immediately recite. And so that's changed the way in which we have to teach and engage them. I would also say that attention spans seem to be much shorter. I think we're all that way. I don't think it's unique to the younger generation, but
Yeah.
I was watching an online course last night where each of the little snippets of lecture was no longer than 4 minutes. It was pretty remarkable, and that was kind of unheard of back in the day, right, Tori?
Absolutely. I was thinking, as you were talking about the immediate availability of information. Just last night, we were having dinner. My kids are working from home. They're both engineers, and we had some little debate, and an iPhone came out and an answer was provided ending the debate. I said to them, there was a time, when your mother and I did not have the internet. It hadn't even been invented yet. And my daughter said, well, for heaven's sakes, what would happen? And I said, well, arguments would go on for years.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like we are in the midst of a trend in education that we really need to manage, because, the thing that is different, I think, for both our sets of children and the young people today going through university is that there isn't less information that they are expected to manage. There's more. We build upon technology, we build upon the applied sciences. There is always more. And so there's so much more today that encourages a trend, I think, towards the more theoretical and less applied in our educational experience. And when we talk about space in our industry, we're really talking about STEM, and the dominant element of STEM is engineering. Engineering's an applied science. And if we're not careful, we'll produce people that are very theoretical, but have less ability to handle the applied side of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good. And I think that trend towards applied education, project-based learning has been going for some time now. As you look into the future, 10 to 20 years down the road, what do you think are going to be the needs of that future workforce, and how does industry and academia work together to make it a reality?
One of the things that's going to be different, and it's actually being accelerated by the economic impact of the pandemic, is that, currently in America, about 62% of boys who recently graduated from high school and 69% of girls go on to some post-high school educational experience, college, technical training, community college. That's nowhere near enough, because 90% of the new jobs that are being created require some kind of post-high school credential. Most of them technically oriented. And even jobs that aren't technically oriented, finance, marketing, name it, are having more and more technical components. And so, while in the last century, being illiterate might have been shameful and we fixed that problem, in this century, being innumerate has to become just as much of a problem that we have to solve. So more of our children need to go on to some meaningful post-high school educational experience, and more of those have to have some kind of technical component. We just can't get around it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more with Heather, and I think that this environment really demands of us more of a closer partnership between academia and industry to help make all of that happen and happen in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it also, Tori, is this. I think there is a culture gap between industry and higher education, particularly when it comes to the need for continuous spiraling education. And we don't do training. A university is where an industry should come to for basic customer service training or quality management even. But when industry says, all right, you're going to invest in and continue to invest in our people, a lot of companies now will allow their employees to, if you get an A, B, or C on some course at a university, the company will pay 80% of the cost of your continuous education. And we've got to have a spiral of learning throughout a lifetime. And it's not the way, a bachelor's degree or a master's or PhD, and then you quit learning is not enough for this generation.
Yes, yeah. No, I agree. And especially in our field, the field we're talking about, that first experience and that first degree at the university is just the beginning of that lifelong career journey. Mm-hmm. And I feel that we've got a very good model going, in the applied side of this, where we have, industry coming in and being involved with universities with real world projects and sending our employees back for more education and even taking the students out into internships. What I wish I could see more of, and it's on us too to make this happen, is the same thing for faculty. Mm-hmm. I feel there's a trend of fewer and fewer faculty who have an industry background before going to academia, and fewer faculty that once in academia continue to have involvement with industry. And we almost need a program like internships, like the projects that keep faculty engaged with practical application. And you're a university president, so you understand this more than I do, but I feel it's all right to hire a person who retired from industry to come into academia and teach. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. It can be a blend.
Yeah.
In fact, the best are. And one of the things that is a challenge is getting faculty to take their summers, not to really bear down on their research on the campus, but to get out and do research in industry and applied research, and making that easier probably would benefit both industry and academia.
Yeah, I think a program that
work together to make some of that happen.
Yeah, I'd like to help if I could. I think a program that makes that easier to bring faculty into industry and even government employees into industry too would be very useful in a number of regards. So I want to change the conversation over to the space strategy, and particularly the defense space strategy. So the recently published defense space strategy from this summer states that in order to ensure space stability, the U.S. in cooperation with its allies and partners needs to, quote, uphold internationally accepted standards of responsible behavior as a good steward of space. So my question is, do either of you believe a set of international norms exists on which to adjudicate good versus bad behavior? And as a follow-on, how important should space international norms of behavior be for the next administration?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tori.
You know, we were just discussing this the other day in the Defense Innovation Board, and I feel that there are actually a wide set of generally understood norms of good behavior in space and in orbit. The commercial industry and the scientific community understand that one doesn't approach someone else's spacecraft. One does not leave unnecessary orbital debris. You know, one respects the spectrum that other people have. That is generally understood. It could certainly be codified so that new players also understand it. And there was discussion in our community about, well, perhaps regulation should precede, perhaps treaties should precede, because we should write down all these rules and then ask people to sign treaties, and then everyone will follow it. I think historically we understand, if we use the law of the sea and practices in maritime, perhaps even in air traffic as a model, that the practice proceeds first. And when a major player, an influential or prominent presence in space says, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we do it, and if you're going to cooperate with us, you'll probably do the same thing, that people generally line up, and then the treaties and the written and formal legal agreements follow, so there are no misunderstandings. The Artemis Accords, for example, and going to the moon is a great example of the United States sort of stepping out forward in the presence of NASA to say, here's our model, and our friends who want to work with us will do something similar. I think that's how that'll proceed.
Mm-hmm.
I expect that's how it will proceed as well. The real challenge will come when somebody doesn't follow those rules, and what's the consequence? Is there, does America develop a declaratory policy and the ability to deter bad actors in space? And that's something I looked at the defense strategy on space when it came out. There's not a lot there, honestly. It's pretty thin. In fact, it's probably one of those that they should have said to the staff, go back and keep working. But the issue of military strategy in space is actually really important and hasn't developed as much as it should be. So we've operated in a largely uncontested domain since the beginning of the space age from a national security point of view. Now we have a threat. Well, threat drives strategy. Strategy should drive force posture and acquisition and concepts of operation. And there's been, in my view, insufficient discussion about what those real strategies are that the Defense Department is trying to buy toward. And there are people out there who say, well, we'll just proliferate low Earth orbit satellites and do it all with cheap commercial satellites. Well, my Subaru is less expensive than a mine-resistant combat vehicle, but I wouldn't want to go to war in it. So some of the, was it H.L. Mencken who said that for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's wrong. We need to think really deeply about what our strategies are and develop our people and equipment to implement those strategies. And that there are a number of different vectors that make up a set of strategies, but unfortunately that Defense Department document didn't touch on any of them.
Gosh, Heather, I couldn't agree more. I think there's just such a temptation due to the daunting nature of this problem to want to jump to a single dimensional solution, a quick fix, if you will, where we'll proliferate, we'll put everything in a distributed network that will be robust to damage. And there is some utility in that, but that in no way is a complete answer, right? Obviously, bullets are always cheaper than targets. You can't blow things up that can be interfered with.
And Tori, as you well know, there are some things that have to survive through all phases of conflict. And there are some things that you can allow to degrade and you don't have to protect them as much. So a proliferated low Earth orbit set of communication satellites, as an example, It's probably a really good approach for some communications, probably not for command and control for your strategic nuclear capabilities. Likewise, one vector of one set of strategies will probably have to do with protecting and defending your assets on it, thinking, chaff and flares and maneuver. And then there's another one which crosses domains that has to do with interrupting an attacker. And that may mean, getting better intelligence and understanding of an adversary's capabilities to attack us and undermining those, including from air, sea, cyber. So there are a number of strategies that thinking about this, I don't think has been as good as it probably should be.
Yeah, you've hit on it directly. And part of the challenge for this community is the physics of space will dictate how we deal with the threats. And it's really a new regime that as a warfighting domain we haven't dealt with before. And you've kind of alluded to some of the special challenges and differences. In low Earth orbit, it's very difficult to defend an individual asset because of its easy access from the Earth and the very short engagement times. But a geosynchronous asset, it is possible to create a zone where you have enough notification, enough time span that an attack is initiated that you might actually be able to defend yourself. And so those two poles dictate very different strategies and responses. And one other thing you mentioned that I want to come back to for our group is that overlaid across all of this is the potential application of deterrence. It's one thing to fight and be prepared to fight and win, and we should do that. It's a better solution to not have to fight at all. And I don't see a great deal of deep thought being applied to that posture yet either.
And it's also, deterrence is not just a one-time event. It's how in a period of escalation or crisis can you cause doubt in the mind of an adversary that they could prevail if they chose to continue this conflict today. And one element of strategy in space might be to develop the capability to hide and deceive so that your adversary in a moment of crisis suddenly realizes that what they thought they knew, they don't know. And that would cause them to potentially back down.
Absolutely. And that's a great subtlety that I'm glad you touched on. Any deterrent environment that's effective has to both have a declarative policy so that people kind of think they know what kind of action will solicit an unacceptable cost and retaliation. But at the same time, the power of uncertainty in the right place is paramount. And space, by the way, offers a tremendous opportunity. It is unbelievably vast. The size of space, especially for higher energy orbits, is so huge, so much larger than the entire surface of the Earth. Our ability and opportunity really to obfuscate, to hide, to make the enemy expend tremendous amounts of energy just finding us and figuring out what we are, and then moving and taking all that away from them and making them do that again should be an integral part of any strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very, very good. Also, last week, the White House released a national strategy for critical and emerging technologies. What does this report mean to you, and how can industry and academia best work together to protect U.S. investment and intellectual property?
Oh, God, that's such a great topic because I feel like we have a new challenge in protecting the innovation chain that we did not really face in the past. We're accustomed to dealing with cyber now, but also espionage, and we kind of know how to deal with that. But I think that at least one of our adversaries has figured out that, why spy when you can buy? So there are a lot of elements to that innovation chain, and most of them are actually pretty open. You can, as a Chinese company, you can come and buy key elements of the supply chain where technologies reside. You can sponsor members of your intelligence community or your armed forces to go to America and receive the best STEM education on the planet and bring all of that home. You can even invest to influencing companies through venture capital, and even do that through shell companies so your presence, influence, and access is not as obvious. All of that is right now an open door to both of our adversaries.
Yeah.
Tori is absolutely right. That technology strategy had two things very early on that I thought were important. One had to do with the development of STEM talent in the United States, and we've talked a little about that. There was something else in there about being a place where innovators we continue to attract the world's innovators and retain them. That is an interesting concept because we're seeing the reverse. We're seeing declining numbers of foreign students come to American graduate schools, and it's harder for them to stay. So dealing with problems of H-1B visas and student visas and allowing highly educated, hardworking, entrepreneurial people to stay and build this country is one of the things we're going to have to grapple with over the next 5 to 10 years. We can't keep educating the most brilliant people in the world at the best universities in the world and then telling them they can't stay in this country and go, build somebody else's country and build their companies. I think we want this country to continue to be a magnet for talent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is tremendously wasteful to do that. And I don't see why, it doesn't come in both directions. If you want to come here and get that education, you should be on a track to stay here. And we should make it easy for you to stay here.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we need to reach what I would call the missing millions, the young people in America who have not been inspired or supported to go into STEM disciplines because the 21st century will demand it. And so we can't just circumvent the problem and not educate the young people who are growing up in America, including those who are the first in their families to ever go to college.
Yeah, very good. Well, another priority recommendation out of that report is to, quote, leverage private capital and expertise to build and innovate. What are the pros and cons of this approach and for national security space? And you've touched on a few earlier, but love to hear your thoughts. Why don't we start with you, Heather?
Well, government funds acquisition, but it doesn't build stuff itself, with very few exceptions. I mean, there are federally funded research and development centers, and those are great. But almost all innovation is actually done in the private sector. And in the area of space, there's a lot going on in commercial space, which is driving down some of the costs and then can be rolled back on to national security. When you look at the amount of research and development that's funded in private sector today compared to what the percentage that was done right after the Second World War, it's been an unprecedented shift. And that's why the Defense Department needs to look. And when I was with the Air Force, one of the things we really tried to do was to lower the barrier to entry so small, innovative companies could do work with the Defense Department, so that we didn't have that bar like you see at the amusement parks that say, you have to be this tall to go on the ride. We need to take the sign down and let small, innovative companies help the Defense Department succeed in national security space.
Yeah, that's a great program. And, you said it exactly right. It is a tremendously rich source of innovation and technology, much of which is applicable to the national security space mission. And it needs to be easy for the government to access that. It is not an effective way to just deal with a budget pinch. And to imagine that private industry will fund the national security mission. And some members in government actually think of it that way. And that's a mistake, because, that private investment will head in a direction of private profit and commercial business. And you're not going to get what you really need. It will never provide the resources that are really necessary to complete the mission. nor is it a way to sort of, shortcut understanding the full set of requirements that the government needs to have to protect our safety and our security. There are things that are just plain unique to that mission. You kind of touched on that with the Subaru and the armored vehicle. There is no commercial need for a Bearcat. You can't go down to Auto Row and buy one because there's no market for it except in the very narrow track of what we need in a security context. So there are things that the government can leverage and take from private industry and innovation, but there are also things that the government will need to ensure is in place because of the uniqueness of the mission. And the government will have to fund that because there is no private market for that stuff.
Mhm. Very good. Well, I have a question from the audience I want to ask. How can we stop the leaks in the STEM pipeline so that we don't lose women and minorities along the way?
Let me start that one out. And Tori, I know you've got experience with this with your young engineers as well. So there's a couple of pieces to this. There's actually been some really good work and studies done by the National Science Foundation about how to engage and keep minorities and women, and particularly in engineering school. It's more engaged learning that helps a lot. Is focusing on the why, not just the what. More girls, you can, when you recruit boys to college, into degrees in college, if you're showing robots and really cool gear, that appears more to boys. And there's overlap in the middle, but girls disproportionately want to know why the problem matters. And if we're not talking about the so what, we miss girls. The environment in engineering school needs to be supportive and not about weeding out. And that's particularly important when you've got a small percentage of the class that feel different anyway. Like you're the only one of a handful of girls in the room, or you're the only Hispanic or a small number in the room. And they're trying to tell you, well, look to your left, look to your right. One of the three of you will graduate in 4 years. Well, you're already feeling like you don't belong. So it tends to push away the people that we need to be attracting. And so it needs to be more supportive and inclusive and problem-based and often community-based learning. And all of those things work to retain minorities and women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Boy, that is so well said. And I want to start by building on what you just said and give you some kudos, because there are so many universities that are rewarded with prestige by being very exclusive. And they literally measure themselves on how many students they reject, how many students they wash out, when what the country needs is more graduates, not fewer. And, the University of El Paso, Texas, under Heather's leadership, takes a completely opposite view. They know that what they need to do is to have a high yield rate of bringing as many students in as they possibly can accommodate, and teaching them good, solid STEM skills, and finishing as many as humanly possible. That's what we actually need. And we should be measuring universities on their productivity, not on their reject rate in the first place. I had also experiences with other universities that went through a journey of improving their retention of women and minorities. You guys actually do quite well at that already, so I'll talk about them instead. And, it was certainly in recruiting, it was exactly what you talked about, understanding that, diversity has such great power in problem solution, but it also means that people look at their choices differently, and you have to answer their questions, and they might be different questions. As you said, why is this matter for this group? How cool is it for this group? That's okay, because it's both, and you can talk to both. But once they're in, the places that I have seen experience just a transformative change in retention of those groups take a very hands-on approach. They have a program that supports those students, that knows who they are, reaches out to them, wraps them in this warm blanket of, there are other students like you here, and we have a partnership with administration. We can see that you are struggling in your courses. You're getting some peer tutoring from other students, whether you like it or not. We're going to help you and pull them through and not just leave them to sink or swim. And one in particular that I was involved with went from, what is really the norm across the country, where the women and minority students had very, very low retention rates compared to the basic population. And they actually flipped that over the span of 3 or 4 years to where those students retained at a higher rate, because every time they started to struggle or feel that they didn't belong, they had a support system around them.
Part of it also in that support system is building on people's strengths as opposed to a deficit model of advising. So if I talk to a student and say, well, I know you didn't have a very good calculus course in high school, and you're coming from an old low-income family, so you got to work 40 hours a week, this is going to be really hard for you. The message that I'm sending is, you can't do this. As opposed to, okay, you've been working all the way through high school, so you know how to work hard. And you took the hardest courses you could, and you succeeded at them. Those are both real strengths. And now we're going to build on those, and let's look at what courses you can take this next semester that are going to build on those strengths. University of Texas at El Paso is 96% minority. And it's one of the top 5 research institutions in the United States, but it has refused to give up its status as an open access university, because we don't believe that, we don't want to be judged by whom we exclude, but by whom we include in their success. And I personally strongly believe that US News and World Report 30 years ago did a tremendous disservice to American higher education by saying that we're going to rate a university highly if it refuses to serve people. And that's a little bit like Yelp saying you're going to get a great restaurant rating if you decline to serve 90% of the people who come to the door. I mean, this makes no sense, and it's done terrible damage to American education.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. And a good friend of mine referred to that support network as the warm nest. So providing and that can be a very, very good thing and a very important thing. So I'd love to hear that from you, Heather, and you, Tori, as well, because you both have an impact on how we do this in the future. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to kind of close with a question and get some closing statements from you. 2020 has been a really challenging year by all measures. So what are you most optimistic about? Heather, what you want to start?
Yeah, I think I'm most optimistic about the resilience of the American people.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, this pandemic is going to be over, and we're going to be standing in line watching students get inoculated, and we're going to have the best fireworks show on campus that night ever. But when you go through hard things, you figure out how to solve problems, become more resilient, gather more tools to your toolbox, including the ability, I think we've all learned about 12 new software programs in the last 8 months to be able to do what we're doing. So Americans are resilient problem solvers. And I think when this is over, we'll be even stronger that way.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, and I'll add another R that's related: resourcefulness. I have just been so inspired by my team, by the people we work with, by just our communities across the country, that we've been met with this tremendous challenge. And as a person in industry, I can tell you, there's a lot of preconceived notions before COVID about how work has to get done, and about where people can be productive and where they can't. And all of that was forced to be set aside and to continue to be successful and take care of our country and take care of our people in a completely altered set of circumstances. And we have all done just fine. and it has changed our perceptions about how work happens. And when we come out of all of this, we're not going to return to a normal that looks like the normal before.
Yeah. I think that that new normal is something we're working on every day, today and tomorrow. And so what that new normal is going to be a real powerful result of this great populace that we're a part of. So thanks for your thoughts and your comments. I really appreciate that. Why don't we go to closing statements, and Heather, you want to start? Just give us a 1 minute kind of a summary of your thoughts on 21st century workforce and
Rob, the only thing that I would add to what we've already talked about is that the economic impact of this pandemic is going to linger with us longer than the public health impact. And I think that higher education, probably higher education working with the most innovative companies in America, is going to be part of the solution. To reskill, there are jobs that went away that aren't going to come back. And people will look to higher education for hope, to give themselves new tools to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And we have to be there for them. We just have to be there. So, so that's, I think, probably my final thought.
Thank you. Tori?
Yeah, probably two things. I sort of touched on in my opening remarks some optimism, but then some clouds that were over us that are here now and pretty threatening. I would close by saying I am not the least bit concerned that our country will not overcome the challenges that are in front of us. We absolutely will. We have resourceful, we have resilient people, we have the best education system in the world, which brings me back to building on what Heather had just said. Higher education and higher education in general is the most powerful force we have in our society to change someone's economic fortunes. It makes all the difference in the world. It is a life changer. It changed my life. I came from a very humble background, and my education allowed me to go out and do, important work for our country and to have a different future and a different future for my children. And so that is absolutely the most important thing. We need to leverage it to the fullest extent we can. And we are starting from a tremendous foundation of a great system. And all we have to do is build on that.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Tori, and thank you, Heather, for that great discussion. I want to wrap up by reminding our audience that from November 16th through 18th, live content just like this will be launching with the Apex Ascend event. So remember to register today to make sure you aren't left out of the conversation. The second half of the summit starts now, so the next sessions will start soon. So select your next adventure from the session lobby. And thanks for coming, and go explore, and I'll see you in November.